right from the start of this campaign, the BBC have behaved like a political actor. I remember the first interview I did on the Today programme, and I came off there and thought, there's no point. There's literally no point. No opportunity to talk about policy, about ideas. But what happened on Friday with that question time audience was truly astonishing. First question gets asked by a chap who has himself produced 8 programmes for the BBC, including the very woke now Doctor Who.
Right.
So he gets to ask a question. Third question is asked by a chap who's a well-known street Palestinian campaigning.
In an exciting conversation that left the audience breathless with tension, Nigel Farage, always a controversial politician, analysed the arguments of the BBC precision and ruthless confidence. It wasn't just an interview, it was a real performance, a masterclass on how to expose media bias and challenge it. The presenter, armed only with predictable phrases and boring questions, soon found himself trapped, unable to resist the audacious and witty attacks of Farage, who brilliantly mastered the facts and left him no chance.
Activist. I think question number 7 or 8 was asked by a girl who's a very active left-wing campaigner, which is perhaps fine. Point I'm making is, a question time audience is supposed to be representative of the country as we go into the final week of a general election. It was miles from that. And I did ask the BBC for an apology.
Having said that, does that necessarily disadvantage you? Because you know what you believe, you're a robust communicator, you get taken on by people that don't agree with you, then it's
sure.
You can position yourself very strongly.
Look, I'm all for a free and fair debate, goodness gracious me. But I've now done a series of big BBC programmes over the last few weeks, and every single audience has been tilted towards either the Green or the Labour Party, in the most astonishing way.
They refute that, and I will read their statement at the end, but fair enough.
During the interview, it became quite obvious that Farage had not come to conform to the rules of the BBC. He has resolutely opened his eyes to the clever ways in which the media undermines movements like his, and has not hesitated to accuse the political establishment of completely ignoring the opinions of ordinary people. Before continuing, he urgently asked for a small favour. Farage did not hold back, saying that the biggest threat to progress in Britain is the paralysing fear of change among politicians. For decades, according to him, the same career politicians have tirelessly changed parties in order to retain their power, and it is not surprising that the status quo remains unchanged. He argued furiously that media outlets like the BBC were acting as silent observers, ensuring that alternative voices would be silenced or ridiculed. His Reform UK party was no exception to this grim scenario. Nevertheless, despite all these obstacles, Farage proudly announced the growing number of members of his party, emphasizing that this is clear evidence that people are beginning to realize the failures of the political elite and demand changes.
Nothing radically different is going to happen. Things will just get a little bit worse. Everything was done to try. Everybody wants to stop us. I mean, the political establishment want to stop us. The political establishment do not want change. And of course, it's great, isn't it? Rishi gives way to Keir. It's just a change of middle management. Nothing radically different is going to happen. Things will just get a little bit worse. Everything was done to try and stop us. If you look at the story selection from the BBC, things that activists said became major news stories. Did that happen with the Labour Party under Corbyn? Well, we did see some of the anti-Semitism, but frankly, not that much of it. The Channel 4 stitch-up over the so-called racist campaigner, the biggest fraud I've ever seen. The guy's an actor, a posh actor, who turned up in our office sounding like Alf Garnett. The whole thing was a stitch-up. I could moan and moan and moan, but there isn't much point. The fact is that we have no support from any national newspaper.
Farage was not going to rest on his laurels and furiously described the political establishment as a closed organization that is trying its best to suppress any movement that threatens its power. He vehemently stated that voters were tired of being constantly ignored by the elite, and this frustration was only accumulating every year, turning into a storm of discontent. According to him, it is this widespread discontent that has become the basis for the emergence of movements such as Reform UK, which offer a real alternative to outdated policies. Farage also did not spare the divided Conservative Party. He stressed that Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak and others have repeatedly failed in their attempts to unite their supporters, instead offering contradictory ideas that alienate both traditional Conservatives and wavering voters. In contrast, Reform UK seeks to channel the growing anger of those who feel abandoned and forgotten by the political system, and give them hope for change.
The broadcasters, including GB News, were very limited by Ofcom in terms of the coverage they could actually give us. And the BBC acted as a political actor right throughout. My first interview on the BBC, I did a speech from Dover about the boats and why Labour's plan wouldn't work. And the new BBC News channel took it live. Midway through, they cut off, and the presenter said, well, there's Nigel Farage again using his customary inflammatory language. Just extraordinary. Now, I actually got an on-air apology, but that's not the point. It was clear from the start that the BBC had a political objective. This ran right through the Russia stuff, where the fact...
When Farage turned his attention to the media, he resolutely pointed to the BBC as a prime example of why public confidence in journalism is plummeting. He fervently argued that the media have enormous power in shaping public opinion, but instead of using this power with responsibility and honesty, they often become engaged players in a dirty political game. According to Farage, bias does not always show up on the surface. It is the formulation of questions, selective editing, and subtle mockery of certain voices that reveal the true intentions hidden behind the facade of objectivity. He bitterly stressed that the UK reform movement is constantly portrayed as marginal, despite its growing membership and influence. Farage explained how such distortions affect public perception, especially among undecided voters who rely on the media to form their opinions. When media outlets like the BBC reject or undermine UK reform, it becomes incredibly difficult for a party to gain trust and popularity. He worriedly argued that a negative media image often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If people start to believe that a party has no chance of success, they are less likely to decide to support it, and this creates a vicious circle from which it is difficult to get out.
This is now a matter of national security.
Nigel Farage with his customary inflammatory language there at a Reform UK press conference. He declined to stand for a seat, but we will have more on what Farage is saying if you want to follow it more. Nigel Farage. Now, an apology. Earlier today, we heard live from Nigel Farage speaking at that election event we just saw. And when we came away from his live speech, I used language to describe it, which didn't meet the BBC's editorial standards on impartiality. I'd like to apologise to Mr. Farage and viewers for this.
However, Farage did not lose hope. He enthusiastically noted that alternative media platforms and mass movements are beginning to boldly challenge the dominance of traditional media by giving a voice to those who feel ignored or misrepresented. In his opinion, this could be the beginning of a new era, when the stranglehold of the media on public opinion will finally weaken, and people will be able to hear the truth. Farage's criticism of the media was not just an expression of discontent, it was an alarming signal that cannot be ignored. He spoke with fervor about how traditional media outlets, such as the BBC, manipulate stories to protect the status quo. According to him, the case is not limited to one unsuccessful interview. It is a systemic bias that ruthlessly ignores alternative opinions. He indignantly argued that the media should play a neutral role in establishing the truth, but instead often become a tool for those in power, betraying the interests of the people. To support his point of view, Farage cited vivid examples when the Reform UK was presented unfairly. He highlighted cases where interviews were interrupted, party statistics were distorted, or politics were misrepresented. Farage emphatically stressed that such tactics create a toxic environment in which the electorate is misinformed, making it difficult for new parties like his to connect with the public and get their ideas across.
It becomes, I'm a Putin supporter. I mean, some of this stuff's always going to happen. It's politics, people get very tribal, but the extent of the bashing was extraordinary. Do you know what? We're through it. I'm already planning the county council elections next year. I've been in an office here earlier on today, sorting that out as a campaign room. We are very conscious now of the potential we have with Labour voters. I mean, Tony Blair even writes in the Sunday Times that reform could now be a threat to a Labour vote. The whole establishment knows that we're here, and it also knows we're not going away. And can the Conservative Party claw those votes back from us? They're so split and divided. I mean, the civil war's broken out already.
Nevertheless, Farage enthusiastically acknowledged that the development of digital media and independent platforms is changing the rules of the game. He noted with pride that these channels provide unlimited access to the audience, bypassing traditional intermediaries who have controlled information for a long time. The growing presence of Reform UK on the internet is a clear indication that people are hungry for alternatives to conventional wisdom and are ready to look for new ways. Although the road ahead may be thorny, Farage is confident that the growing public discontent with the biased media will eventually become a powerful catalyst for his party. The key point in his argument was the unprecedented growth in the number of Reform UK members. Farage emphatically stressed that this surge is not accidental. It is a direct response to the failures of traditional parties that failed to meet the expectations of voters. He anxiously pointed out the frustration of people who feel that neither the Conservatives nor the Labour Party represent their interests properly. This disappointment, in his opinion, only underscores the need for change and opens up new horizons for his party. What do you think about this video? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you later.